we go. Greetings and hello, everyone. Welcome to the Middle Grades Conversation. This is episode 2 in our 8th season. We're joined by educators from across the state of Vermont, and today we're going to be talking about supporting peers, colleagues, and what types of professional development folks are looking for as part of their our return to, I guess, normal school, maybe. I'm not sure what we call this period that we're in. But we're going to discuss what's happening in middle level education at the moment from our classroom perspectives. And this work is part of the Middle Grades Collaborative. Also, we work with the Tarrant Institute for Innovative Education and Up for Learning based in Montpelier. We have a special guest this afternoon, Vasante Mayet, who will introduce herself. And she's also part of a collaborative that's working to support new educators across Vermont. So again, thank you everybody for joining. We're going to do a quick roundtable introduction, and then we'll get into our discussion. Vasante, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Vasante Mayet. I teach 5th and 6th grade science at Shelburne Community School, and I've been a mentor teacher through our school district for many years, and I've hosted student teachers from local colleges. And this year, took on a position with the NEA in a program called Grow Vermont Ed, where we are supporting new teachers as well as paraeducators or interventionists and teachers that are working under emergency or provisional licenses, and we're supporting them in becoming licensed educators and reaching their goals of either continuing in the classroom or entering the classroom as teachers.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Joe?
Hi, I'm Joe Rivers from Brattleboro Area Middle School in Brattleboro, Vermont. I work with young people here, grades 7 and 8. I think I'll leave it there and pass it on to the next person.
Hi, everybody. I'm Christy Howell. I work as a program associate and communications coordinator at Up for Learning, as Don mentioned. We do youth-adult partnership across Vermont and more across the country and even across the world. We're starting to get some teams in different countries. So really looking to make change through partnering with youth and adults and facilitating conversations around wellness and sustainability, equity, all sorts of different topics. So thank you.
Hi, I'm Meg O'Donnell. I teach humanities to 7th and 8th graders on the Red Team at Shelburne Community School. Glad to be here.
And I'm Don Taylor. I teach sustainability at Main Street Middle School in Montpelier, and I'm working with grades 5 through 8. So again, thank you very much, everybody. Our first question is really going to be just a sort of a roundtable introduction. And I've been kind of hearing about the current challenges facing teachers and maybe some shifts that have happened in over the past 3 years of the pandemic and sort of entering our 4th year, still dealing with some of the underlying issues involved in the pandemic. And I know that Vasante is probably going to talk a little bit later about maybe some of the challenges facing our workforce. But one of the things that we're kind of working on or thinking about is the support for our fellow colleagues and making sure there's a lot of talk about wellness and making sure that folks feel good about what they're doing. And I guess we'll start with Vasante. What are you seeing or hearing about from your colleagues at Shelburne Community School? And maybe what are some of the supports that are in place to kind of just support all teachers and maybe just not those who are new to the profession?
Okay, thanks, John. One thing I think that Shelburne Community School and CVSD, Champlain Valley School District, is dealing with is probably a shortage of guest teachers. And so I think veteran teachers as well as new teachers are working together with our, all the staff in our building, paras, interventionists, to cover classes and just make sure that students are getting their needs met and also having all the opportunities that we hope to, offer them in a school day still happen. So I think that's been a challenge. I don't think it's unique to Shelburne. I think it's happening everywhere, the guest teacher shortage. And then I think, we're getting support, from new administration and new ideas in terms of like our wellness. I think just, having, still time during professional development hours where it's teacher directed and we can connect with our content alike peers and have time to plan and share ideas, as well as, some new learning and some of the other just kind of nuts and bolts things that need to be covered at faculty meetings and things. And I think there's small little actions happening also, in our building, like treats on Friday morning and, just gratitude and acknowledgement to one another when things go really well.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Joe?
Yes, at some point here, I'm going to have students running through the room, so I will end at that point, whatever happens to be going on. There's a lot of things that have changed and for the better in our district. I'm very pleased with some decisions that were made. We have more planning time than we've had in the past, so that's been added in order to ease some of the burden. We're meeting with more of the players who actually work with the same populations that we do on a more regular basis, so we're able to communicate more adult to adult around our planning and our collaboration, and so that's been helpful as well. In our faculty meetings and in the diversity equity committee meetings that we have regularly, it's been an experiential learning model that's been employed, and that leads to less hierarchy and more collaboration. And so staff is able to work on projects together and to learn together and to then process that learning and evaluate where they want to go next as individuals, but also in group settings. And that's been also helpful. So it's been more on a human scale this year than it's been recently. And so I think the administration has taken some really positive steps to help us along. We have the same issues that Shelburne has around not enough staff every day and trying to scramble that. And again, the administration has been really supportive with those issues. And we've tried to cover for each other by creating a buddy system, which allows for planned coverage. And so it's not a scramble every morning, but instead an ability to know what, because we've already decided what plan B and plan C are before those things happen. So dealing with the different issues, but I think being proactive and making some good decisions has been where we've been so far.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And we have an additional guest, Dr. Katie Farber. And Katie, would you mind introducing yourself? And then I'll just give you a quick overview of the question we're discussing right now.
Thank you so much. Yes. Hi, Katie Farber, Assistant Professor of Education at St. Michael's, coming in hot from a class. So thanks for having me.
So Katie, we're just talking right now about where, some of the challenges that are facing teachers and some of the supports that we're hearing about in schools, and what's being, some of the challenges, and then what's being done to address those. We also have our guest Vasanti Mayet, who teaches at Shelburne Community School, and she's going to talk also about the Grow Vermont Ed program in just a second here. But I think, Christy, you're next. Like, what are you hearing and seeing that teachers are doing to kind of, keep up with the challenges that we're facing?
Yeah, thanks. It's great to hear that more planning time and better systems have been put into place after the past couple of years. Yeah, I mean, I can't speak to, I'm not in the classroom every day. I'm not in one school every day. But I am hearing kind of universally that the year has started off much, much better than last year in terms of teacher support. We do have one school that is struggling a lot with staff. So we've actually had to cancel a team meeting because there wasn't enough staff who could leave we were going to have a retreat off campus and we didn't have enough staff that could come with us. So we had to cancel that retreat. So still, I think facing some of the shortage problems that others have spoken to in that area. I think more and more schools are looking for like restorative approaches. And I think those restorative approaches are not only in discipline with students, but among, conflicts that arise with faculty and administration. So I think the work that we're doing at UP, we're seeing more and more schools reach out for restorative practice work. So I think that is a way that can be an alternate, way to handle conflict that arises and a supportive way to build community at school. So yeah, from my very limited perspective of, kind of the in and out of schools, that's what I'm seeing, not just in one community, but thanks.
I have the great pleasure of working with Vasanti. So I'm gonna, she sort of mentioned like the systems level. I'm gonna talk more specifically about team, and colleagues. We have on our team this year some brand new to education folks that are coming in as paraeducators or intensive need one-on-one paraeducators. And something that became pretty glaring at the beginning was how do we support folks who really have very limited experience in the classroom? And it was hard, it was challenging. We were kind of trying to build systems as we were in it and not realizing the gaps until it was like right in our face. We were like, oh man, we need to pause game. And one of the things that I've been really appreciative, Vasanti mentioned this, but just, when you have new admin, they don't know what they don't always know, right? So in some ways, that's been refreshing. I think that was sort of why we got all the new ones on our team, because we didn't have that sort of 10,000 foot view of like, oh wait, we put all these new people on the same team. That's probably not sharing the resources. But it's also emphasized, where does training come from on the job for folks who are new to education? Where does it come from? If they're making $15 an hour and they're out straight and they're trying to figure it out, and it really has to be on the job, and who's responsible for that. So it's kind of illuminated some of the interesting conundrums of where teacher training or just education training can happen for new folks. So we haven't figured it out yet, but at least we've been able to sort of name some of the things, and we've really emphasized, our admin has been really helpful about setting aside some of our PLC time for just what's the team need, what do the members of the team need, and how can we support that? Just listening, right? Just listening. And we're, it goes back to norms, right? We're realizing that we have to be very clear about norms, about putting, our kids are our priority, and what do we need to put in place to support our kids, not just the ones that have the most needs, but all of them. So I would just say, norms have become really important. Listening has become really important. Mentoring, our mentoring program at CVSD has been great. And I feel fortunate that we have that, because we have tools that we can lean on for some of our folks.
I think I'm up. So I'm thinking a lot about this, about teacher sustainability in our profession. And for me personally, I had to get really intentional about my my practices to work in person during the pandemic in the classroom. Like I had to be really thoughtful about making sure that I spent time with the trees every day and that I sat in silence every day, because teaching is such a full and very hectic place, and the news is such a full and hectic place in the world. And so I think, like so many of our students who experience that chronic state of hypervigilance and decision fatigue, we as educators have to design more carefully places where we can find that peace and that regeneration, right? So that's just sort of my personal angle into this. It became really important to me to care for myself, like make sure that I was doing all of those things. But it's obviously it's way bigger. You can't self-care your way out of making teaching sustainable. And so, Meg, thinking about what you said, we're doing a series of workshops here at St. Mike's that are all with the teacher sustainability theme, right? So we have understanding secondary traumatic stress, understanding vulnerability, resiliency, and protective factors, giving permission to slow down. And then I'm doing a new teacher survival guide, tips and skills and strategies for managing the many and varied demands of the profession. And so that's going to be like, I've emailed a lot of my teacher colleagues and friends to say, like, what are your strategies? What advice would you have for new teachers? If you were starting out again in this climate, what would you offer? And then I'm going to give them like a host of choices to actually design a toolkit so that they can think upon, their team level, their personal level, their classroom level, like go through various ways that they can really prepare themselves to be a whole person in the field, right? Because if you don't go into this mindfully like that, then it's a system and a job that does lead to burnout. So we have to like prevent against that, especially now. And then reminding ourselves why we do it in the first place and connecting to those broader themes. So yeah, I'm thinking a lot about that. In terms of my colleagues, it was helpful for me to learn what was supportive to them and try to provide that. And then they learned where my vulnerabilities were. And they knew that sometimes I wasn't going to be able to go have a conversation at lunch, that I just needed to be in this quiet space to be able to go teach the rest of the day. So this is basically learning what your people need and how you can give that to them. And then also all of our pre-service teachers and masters teachers, like how can we prepare them for caring for themselves and sustaining themselves?
Thank you so much, Katie. So many of those little points you made kind of hit me, right? Kind of where I'm feeling right now. And many of you have indicated that this year has started out really strong. And I think my year has done the same. But I would say, so one of the things that I'm noticing, I think, is that we have so many new folks in the school and new admin that you end up like swallowing up all, if you're someone who's been doing it for a long time, you kind of swallow up all these responsibilities. And I think you become maybe overcommitted, which is where I am right now. And when overcommitted means that you have all these different things going on with all these people who are interested and want to help and support not only the kids, but the school. And, managing that and managing those expectations. And I think, as Katie said, keeping time for yourself, I think is harder than ever. And I don't know about you folks, but I'm getting this sense that people feel like, oh, we're back in the classroom. There is a sense of normalcy. And now it's time to really go, go, go. And I'm not sure that that's really the response that we need. And Katie also mentioned this permission to slow down. I feel like things are speeding up. I feel like everybody, there's this a little bit of anxiety about, well, we got to get all the kids caught up. We have to do, this, that, and the other thing. And to me, it seems that we're starting to get into that frenetic pace again. And so I'm concerned about that. And this idea of teacher sustainability, I'm not sure I ever really thought about it, as if you've been doing it, for 5 or 10 or however many years, you're kind of like, oh yeah, this is my job. This is what I'm doing. And I don't think we've taken time enough time maybe to reflect on what the pandemic has done to us. And I feel like that it's a mindset, and that there were parts of the pandemic, to be frank, that were very that had a negative impact for sure, right? And so that mindset, and I also want to mention something. We can talk more about this too. I'd be interested to hear how people are feeling about the restorative approach versus a punitive disciplinary process, because I think that what's happened, I'm starting to hear people say, we've taken it easy on these kids for a long time, and we need to raise the expectations. And, there's behaviors that are happening, and maybe the restorative approaches aren't addressing some of those really significant behaviors. And as Vasanti mentioned, we don't have, sometimes we have teacher shortages, or we don't have the coverage. And I think Vasanti mentioned this idea of making sure that kids have all the opportunities they would have, as if a school was just moving along and everybody, was there. And for me, those opportunities include the coaching and mentoring of things like behavior, and the consistency, and the, consistent set of expectations. And so I just, those are things that I'm thinking about right now. I would also agree. What's been really helpful for me is this year, I'm actually working with another educator in my classroom, which has been huge for me. Like, I wouldn't be able to do what we're doing without that. And I'm grateful every day for having another adult who's helping to run our program. And I also start to worry about what's going to happen next year. I know it's only October, but having somebody else who you can trust and bounce ideas off and share a laugh with has been really tremendous for me. And I think that maybe many of us had this sense of isolation during the pandemic, and being able to work with somebody right in the classroom has been really good. And I also feel like it helps you understand, like, co-teaching, and to think about respect and collaboration. And what I think Katie mentioned, what do the people you're working with, what do they need, and how do you deliver that to them? So these are all great points, and I appreciate everybody's feedback and everybody's perspective. As usual, it always gives me something to think about. And now Vasanti is part of an organization called, I think it's Grow Vermont Ed. And Vasanti, one of the reasons we're interested in this organization is because I think it sounds like it's trying to help new teachers and new educators get into the teaching profession. I was just wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit about that program, how that program came to be, and what you're seeing as some of the needs of new teachers and new educators are.
Hey, that sounds like a great question, Don. I am driving, so let me know if I cut out here. Grow Vermont Ed came about through Juliette Longchamp, who works for the NEA, and also, through her job at the NEA, she runs the mentoring programs across the state and trains mentor leaders, and she also supports teachers in becoming nationally board certified. And so through that work of hers, she's got a network of people across the state that she kind of knows, and I would say kind of supports in professional growth. Like, okay, you did this, so what are we going to support you in doing next? And so she saw a need, I think, across the state, given that everybody, was needing classroom teachers. There was even a mass exodus in our state of people leaving the profession or leaving schools. And like Meg said, we have a lot of new teams and new teachers even in our building. And so last spring, I think she started thinking, okay, the NEA can, develop a program that is going to help teachers go through the peer review process, or interventionists or paraeducators, people working under emergency licenses, or people who are already being pulled on a daily basis to, cover classrooms. And I think she really talked it up in districts where also, there's just less people moving to those districts to become teachers, the Northeast Kingdom and some other rural places across the state. And through that, she kind of developed this program with, I think, people that she was working with in the peer review process, and said, okay, I'm going to collect some faculty. I'm going to set up a Jumpstart Week in August where, I think there's about 66 educators involved in the program across the state. And most of these, young educators or educators who have been teaching for, many years or working in a school for many years, they might just not have been able to pass the praxis test, or they, had one more thing to submit for licensure, and they just didn't get those last steps. And so she said, we got to support these people. They're doing the work, they're in the building, they're supporting students, they're supporting their communities. How can we get them licensed, in kind of a timely, efficient fashion? And so, like I said, we worked with the cohort for a week in August, and they got kind of, a refresher on all the things that many teachers get during undergrad, child development, different pedagogies, and also a little background into just even community building and classroom setup, as that some of them were, starting in the classroom, some were returning to the classroom, some are still in their interventionist job or paraeducator jobs in hopes of getting, another position within their building. And so now we meet about, every Tuesday in the months up until June. We're going to keep up with this. And 2 of the weeks they work on their core kind of expectations or teaching competencies. And then 2 of the weeks they're in content groups. And we've got an elementary group, a preschool group, special education group. There's middle school science, social studies, LA and math. Almost every, group that is in a K-12 or PK-12 school is covered. And that's pretty amazing too. And like I said, there's young people, there's people who have been working in schools for many years. And, I think there's even some people really close to retirement, but it's really hopeful in the sense that they really see their futures, however long or short, in education in the classroom. And so it is pretty motivating to be with them. And they're putting in 2 hours a week at night, and they're working through the whole peer review process, which as a seasoned educator feels really overwhelming when you look through the competencies and you're like, oh, all these things that, we know and do because they've just become habit, sometimes they're harder to pick apart, and you can, overthink it. So it's also been a really nice process to help them mine for evidence in their, daily teachings of things that might cover, early phonics education in the younger grades, or, oh no, when you teach this informational text, you're also covering this science concept or this social studies concept. So I'd say it's pretty exciting program. I don't know what Juliet's hope is for, years to come, if this is something she hopes the NEA is going to do for a certain amount of time, or if it's just kind of this 1-year cohort and we see what happens.
Thank you so much, Vasanti. I just had a real quick follow-up question before we get into sort of a roundtable discussion. When you talked about a mass exodus in Vermont, do you or does the Vermont NEA know, with, I don't know, like the percentage of teachers who left last year or the percentage shortage that the Vermont public schools are facing when it comes to filling positions?
I don't have an exact number, but I do remember an article, I think in 7 days or in Vermont Digger sometime, late spring, or the summer, that talked about some of these, smaller rural districts like having, hundreds of openings within the building. And not all classroom positions, everything from, and I know at Shelburne, Meg knows, custodians to cafeteria workers to interventionists to guest teachers, like special educators, like just so many openings across some of these schools. And I live in Essex, and I know even within Essex, Westford School District, plenty of things posted, even on Front Porch Forum, like we need people to work in the schools, variety of positions. And so I don't have an exact number. I just feel like I was surprised that even in our state where, I felt like, okay, we did the best we could during the pandemic. I think that was where it was eye-opening to me, like you said, what effect did the pandemic have on some of our teachers?
Thank you so much. I just kind of want to riff off of everything Vasanti just talked about. And I guess a couple questions I have, and I know I have a habit of like freight training questions, but I guess, what are people seeing at their school in terms of both staffing, impacts, and maybe how folks are dealing with that? And then also Vasanti was talking about some real nuts and bolts of teaching, right? Like have, integrated studies. So you read an article about greenhouse gases, and not only is it reading criteria and standards you're meeting, but also the science standards, which, to most of us seems like, oh yeah, of course. But I guess my question is, what are some nuts and bolts things that you would be telling a new teacher, right? So what are the important things in your practice? So again, maybe just talk a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of shortages or maybe supports for new teachers. And then what are some of the sort of nuts and bolts things that you would recommend for anybody who's new in the classroom? And Joe, we'll start with you.
Childcare. I think childcare is a really big issue for lots of folks who are starting out or younger. And the crunch of time that folks have to plan their teaching while they're also trying to find some place for their own children to be, that's a really big issue in our district. And it's not something that's happening in the hallway to address, but it's something that's happening in the lives of the people that we bring in to try to work with the young folks that come to school every day. And the adults are being pulled in lots of directions, and they don't have control over a lot of that. And so I don't know how the people in their 40s and 30s and 20s, how they are able to do both things. And I don't see educators necessarily being the ones to answer this, but I hope the legislature does something to try to answer this issue, because it's probably not just in the schools, but it's a big piece of what's being problematic in schools right now. Teachers want to be here, but they are pulled in other directions by things they don't control. And as far as what's going on within the building to try to support, a lot of it is mindset. One of the things that we've had to get past is this idea of the phrase I heard it mentioned earlier, co-teaching. I don't think there's any such thing as co-teaching in Vermont. I think that we have collaboration, but there isn't enough time to plan together what we're going to do. I think we have situations where we have folks who take the main brunt of the work, and then they work with someone else who has specific skills that they can bring to that same setting, and then together they work to provide something better for young people. So some of it is mindset. And then for younger teachers, I think it's important to talk about what we've talked about earlier, and that is the idea that there's things you control, there's things that you can influence and things you have no control over. And Don, you and I have talked about this. I think both of us have invested a lot of time sometimes in that part of influence. And sometimes we spend so much time in trying to influence that it cuts into that part that we can control, because we only have so much time. And I know I've cut way back in the influence category in order to try to have more control over that part that I really do have more of a say in. And that's made a big difference. And that's not just for people who are in their 60s. I think that's for people who are in their 20s and 30s and 40s too. Trying to focus more on those things that you really do have some say in, and hope that the system is going to provide. And sometimes the system does, and sometimes it doesn't. We've been fortunate this year to have some changes that have been positive for us systemically.
There's so many things tickling through my brain that I want to make sure that I'm like on point about what we were talking about in terms of supporting new teachers and supporting colleagues in our buildings. I think you can't, yeah, it's really hard to teach mindset, right? It's really hard to like impose your mindset on somebody else. If somebody's really struggling with some student behaviors. I've had a lot of our building subs come down to me to say, I don't know what to do with this group. They're really challenging. And I just try to like get to the essence of like, you know, I do say to them, I want all of us to hold kids in a positive regard, but I recognize that as a sub, you're gonna see they're gonna challenge you the most. And so I try to like encourage, hey, really, you know, you do have control over that domain, right? So that is one thing, you know, you want to move a kid, like move, you know, change the seat so that it works for you while you're in charge there, right? Come up with 3 things that are your like non-negotiables, whatever, you know, whatever it might be. This one sub said, so I can rely on my kindergarten teaching strategies for middle level. And I was like, yes, like, you know, like offer them some flexibility, be patient with them. You know, it just like Joe, I mean, I think you kind of nailed a lot of it. It's like if you're a sub for, you know, this class and you don't have a lot of training, like keep it really simple. Like try to keep what you can control in that moment as simple as possible. And the kids will, and being consistent, right? Like keep them in a positive regard, try to keep them engaged and just assume that they're going to give their best intents. And I'm realizing that, Christy, I just completely jumped in front of you. So I'm so sorry. I'm going to shut up.
That's no problem at all, Meg. Yeah, because I'm, you know, thinking I'm not in one school building, and I'm just thinking back to like my own days as a teacher, middle school teacher, and how much of it was about relationship building and building trust with students. And that doesn't happen immediately. And sometimes it feels like it might never happen, but just how important that relationship building is so that when there is a conflict that arises, that you have that relationship established. And I think too, we see that with our teams at Up for Learning. Like we always try to do some, you know, getting to know you activities, some games, things that are not in the realm of the problem we're working on or whatever, but just how key relationship building is, and we can't do this work without it. I think the comment about focusing on what you can control and what you can influence, and then trying not to be too concerned about what you can't control. I can't even imagine right now, given the political climate of our country, like how much there is that teachers just can't control with these pressures coming from outside forces that are just horrible. I'm thinking about what's happening in Randolph right now, and it's just heartbreaking seeing what students are going through. So yeah, I think if I were back in the classroom, it would be very hard for me to not sort of throw myself in the realm of what I can't control right now. And then I always came back to, like, I had a mentor say to me once, like, students want you to be organized, fair, and knowledgeable. And I just could have sort of kept those three in my mind a lot, like as kind of my three things I was always aiming for, in addition to the relationship building. So those are just some things that were coming to mind as I listened to all of you speak. But I'm just thinking a lot about teachers right now and what the climate is. Thanks.
Yeah. Oh man, so much there. I could just go in that direction. I was thinking a lot about when Joe was speaking, the crushing pressure that my colleagues were facing, the parents of young children, and the repeated shutdowns of their childcare, and the very limited sick days and personal days that they had. It was unbearable and unnecessary. So here we are. We're in this climate where, you know, businesses are saying, hey, work from wherever you want. Let's have 4-day weeks. Here's a cereal bar. Here's a coffee bar. Like, do all of this. And then we're coming back from the pandemic, but we're still having the same exact model for teaching and the same really limited contract with really inflexible time. It makes absolutely no sense. And then we're scratching our heads wondering why people aren't wanting to stay in the job. Like, how can we make it more flexible for people? How can we have the professional development be offered? There's one, you know, as a podcast, there's one that you can, you know, tune into from after the baby is asleep at 8 p.m. And there's another that's available in person after school. Like, this is stuff we know how to do. How can we streamline and paperwork and processes to be more efficient, so our teachers are working on creating innovative pedagogy and building relationships versus filling in like unlimited forms or doing other menial tasks? Like, I'm thinking systemically about those issues a lot, and I feel like we need to innovate to match the moment to make teaching more professional systemically. So there's that. And then there's also just like for new teachers, okay, so framing the beginning of teaching as a learning year, you can change, you can't do it all. Your personal health matters, your mental health matters. And then where do you find your professional support? Who are your mentors? How can you build those colleague relationships? How can you find people that challenge and support your thinking, right? Because we don't want to just walk in the same circles and hear ourselves reinforced, but how can we learn and grow in whatever professional community that might look like? Particularly, I think that's important when you're from a certain, you're white or you're privileged, and you need to engage with scholars from historically marginalized groups to understand challenges or just to listen. And then, as much as you can, managing your own, nervous system or emotions and reactions, managing your time and your stress. And then hearkening back to Christy, what you're saying about these situations that are happening, can you let policy and mission statements protect the work you do with students? So what's the equity policy say about protecting the identity and lifting up families? What does it say? How are you expressing that so that you can feel the protection in the decisions that you're making, so you don't feel so alone and vulnerable around some of that more justice seeking work? Those are some things just listening to you and thinking about.
Thank you, Katie. So one of the things that you just said was like, feel the protections of the policy. And I think what's interesting about the time we're in too is that we have, at least in my experience, we have so much turnover at the administrative level that there's not feeling that protection is not always there. And so, for example, I took kids on a field trip, which is always like, I don't know what it's like, but with middle school kids, a field trip is like, here we go, we're on the bus and I'm on it too, yay. And but anyway, so I was looking for the list. I was like, okay, where's the field trip list of all the things that I got to do to make sure that it's, and pandemic and change in admin, there's no list. So you kind of make it, you're like, okay, what do I know from my experience? And boy, I hope I covered all the bases, right? Talk to your nurse, talk to your secretary, keep your fingers crossed, and order like 10 extra lunches because the kids are going to forget theirs. But it's that kind of thing where, you're talking about field of protections, but in some places those are uneven or shifting or getting changed, and I think that creates a great deal of anxiety and stress for teachers. And then also, just this idea of sort of more professional systemically. I think that what we're being asked to do so much right now, and we're always asked to do that, right? But it just seems like the amount of stuff and that we're being asked to do. And I find that teachers, when the pressure is applied in a way that they may not think is appropriate or fair, they act the same way that my middle school kids do, right? They might rebel, they might not do it, they might not be bought in. And so I'm thinking a lot about motivation, like what's motivating teachers right now, and how do we really dial in on that motivation, and how do we give teachers breaks? Like you talked about time. I mean, can you imagine if we had, a 3-day weekend once every month where people could, you could go in for half the day and just be on your own and working, and then the other half of the day, was yours, right? And it's stuff like that that would allow people to catch up and sort of lose that stress and lose that anxiety. But I do feel like that that policy and that mission, especially in the time we're in, can be shifting quite a bit. And then the other piece that I think is really a struggle for new teachers is the amount of work and planning that many of us have put in for years and years and years. So I wanted to do a project in my class. I went to my Google Drive, I typed in PSA campaign, and I had a document from 2012 that popped up, modified it, boom, there it is. And for all the new teachers who are creating this stuff and having to spend hours going out and researching it and what's the best, how do I just can't imagine what that's like. And so I wonder if there's a way that veteran teachers could be sharing these resources, or maybe it's just a question of working together and sharing ideas. But my Google Drive right now is like 30 gigabytes of just lesson plans and all that. And if you don't have that kind of stuff, what are you doing every day? Because the lesson planning, is just, I just remember as a young teacher, hours and hours and hours. And the last thing too is last year, Meg brought a colleague of hers who was in her second year teaching, and she was or maybe her first year, right, Meg? And she was pretty articulate about how much work it is and how overwhelming. And again, what are we doing to help folks kind of weather that storm of the first couple of years and feel good about what's happening? Those are questions that are certainly coming to mind. Meg?
Yeah, Don, because that was one of the threads that went through before, but I forgot about it. But it was absolutely about sharing resources. And I call foul on teacher pay teachers. I mean, I do think we should be compensated, but it's like, if we shouldn't have to pay for it. It should be free. Like, I mean, it's just, and I know, like, I just had my son's conference last night. There were things in his room that I had my phone out and I was like, click, click, click. And I asked permission. I think permission and giving credit where it's due. But I 100% want to double down on like helping new teachers, sharing resources. I go to colleagues to get, hey, how did you do this before? What did it look like? How did you structure the lesson? It's not always the content, but it's like, how do I keep them engaged? I've got them for 45 minutes and I can't, what do I need to put in place? And there was, here's the only other thing I was going to say. I tried to make, I don't know, I guess it was like a dentist appointment the other day. And because all businesses are feeling the shortage, right? It said, we're going to be closed from 12 to 2 for professional development. And I was like, man, I know some schools have early release or late start, but that just gets so filled. And it's like, man, it would be so great if schools could adopt something where it's like, I don't know, or the state. It's too big. But I would love for us to be able to say, we're going to use this time for networking professional development. And, maybe it's the Grow Vermont Ed, Vasanti. I don't know. Like maybe there's a way that we can say, here's a network, here's a resource, here's something you can tap into to just help you out. Sorry.
These are great ideas, everybody. And also, as always, just really big things to consider. And especially when you're moving in and out of your classroom and you're dealing with collaborating and talking to colleagues, what are some of these things that maybe we should be asking for and demanding, right? Like what's the protection from these policies, and how are, and how are we dealing with these situations, and making sure that everybody knows that. And then I also feel like it's an equity issue, right? Some teachers have like 15 years worth of lesson plans and other teachers don't. And so how are the kids, experiencing what should be a similar, whatever, science, social studies, math curriculum from teachers with vastly different experience levels? Joe?
Two ideas. We have a shared Google Drive in our social studies department. And so the things that we create end up there. And so there are 4 of us, and we can all look at that and use that. The other thing that we've changed this year is meeting times and how much time we do spend with the colleague that also teaches a similar topic that we do. And so we're having more meeting time with that colleague in hopes of some of the things that we've just talked about, the idea of collaboration and sharing content and strategies and approaches. So those are 2 ways that we can break down some of that stuff. I guess the third thing I'd say, though, some people look at TikTok and get their lesson plans from there. I think that's crazy. I don't get it. People look at TikTok and they run across the hallway and they say, "This is a great lesson." I said, "How do you even know it's a great lesson?" They have like a 30-second clip saying everything was wonderful. Social media is not the truth. And so some young people who are getting into teaching, they are trying to learn how to be teachers through social media. And they need to walk across the hall and talk to a colleague who's actually been doing it for a little while, and face-to-face human stuff. And if we can set up systems within our time that we have, then I think that's the way to go. I don't think TikTok's the answer, but I think it's an easy go-to for people who are scrambling and don't have a lot of time to figure things out themselves.
That might be a topic for a whole different webinar. I also think about the fatigue of social media and how much energy that takes. And, again, back to what Katie said about that sustainable professional sustainability. So we're almost at the end of our time here. Again, I want to thank everybody for the thoughtful input and ideas and responses. We're going to end with a little bit of a lightning round, not too quick, but I just want to ask what people are recommending or looking for in terms of professional development or reading, or sort of a resource that you recommend, and maybe with the idea of some of those new teachers out there, or maybe to support your colleagues. And I want to thank Vasanti for joining us. I really, really appreciate it. I appreciate hearing your perspective, and congratulations, or I don't know if congratulations is the right word, but I'm really impressed by the work that you're doing with that Grow VT Ed. I think that's important work, and keep it up. And I know they're in good hands, and 66 is a big cohort. That's awesome. And I hope they have a successful year. But we'll start with you, and then this will kind of close us out. Again, what's one resource or professional development opportunity you're looking to, or that you would recommend? Vasanti?
Let's see. I feel like I think that some of the work that it's funny, Meg and I have been collaborating on kind of together, but not always face to face, is around, really building middle school community, after the pandemic. And I think when I, I don't know if I want to call that PD that I want restorative circle, or do I want responsive classroom for middle school? But I do think that, you know, no matter the grade level, even like Meg said, having had my conferences with my high school sons teachers, like veteran teachers, new teachers, we all need a refresher on like building space where students feel valued and safe and are, they're there to do the learning, but it has to come from the teacher, and it does require our mindset. And I loved that idea of someone mentioned like they're, knowing your 3 pillars and what you want in your space. And I think when teachers, read and get ideas, oh, do this with your advisory or do this with your homeroom, they should be doing those things with all their classes. Like every time in middle school or high school that you switch classes, you need to sit in a circle and you need to let kids say their names and you need to greet them and get to know them and then get to the content. Slow down to go fast and really, value the relationships. I think that's where the PD and the work that I think gets me in the classroom every day. That's where it is for me.
If you have the opportunity, if you're in the northeastern part of the state, take a class with Katie Farber, and you'll learn a lot from professional development. She's at St. Michael's. So are Meg and I, graduates. So that's my little spiel there. Anything else? Experiential learning as a tool for professional development. The idea that you go through something together and you go through that process, so much more change happens from that as opposed to the hierarchical, here's the expert come in, talk to you about everything you don't do right, and now you're supposed to do it right, and then they leave. We've adopted that model, and boy, professional development feels so much better now. I hope it continues.
That's great. I just read with Up for Learning the Little Book of Race and Restorative Justice by Fania Davis, and that I found just incredibly powerful, just the historical context that she delivers and bringing racial justice and restorative practice together with some of the RP groups that we're working with for Up. It's been really helpful just in my sort of contextualizing everything we're talking about. And then as an English teacher, I always went back to, it's like an oldie but goodie, but The English Teacher's Companion by Jim Burke, I just found incredibly helpful for like, if I needed to just pick up, and find a lesson plan quickly, some ideas for writing prompts. I just found it's sort of just a classic, but I really like that one as an English teacher.
Gosh, I think the thing I want to keep going back to is being vulnerable to ask for help, right? Like, I think your mindset has to be about, hey, I could really use some help with this, whether you go across the hall, whether you tap into an online community. I would really love to, there's so many amazing examples of what teachers are doing out there. And sometimes they're shy or they don't think that it's worth sharing. And I just want to like break down those barriers and be like, just put it out some, whether it's through MGI or MGC or through college sites. I don't know what and so probably, Joe, that's why they go to TikTok, because we don't have like an educational TikTok, but maybe that's what we need to figure out, because there's incredible things that are happening, and you just don't always know where to go to get it. And so I would just love, and if folks are listening, I just, choose one thing that you think you're doing pretty well and put it out and share it with others. Say, hey, I did this. What do you think? Get some feedback, start a professional, conversation around, what do you think about this?
Yeah, that's so funny, Meg, because I just had a student stay after class today, and it's thanks, Joe, by the way, for the shout out to come to one of my classes. But she stayed and we were talking. That's why I was coming in a little bit late. We were doing a lot with like division of fractions today and things like that. And she said, I saw that you put a couple links in for culturally responsive pedagogy in math and what that looks like. And I'd like us to spend some time on figuring out how to do that. And I was like, why, yes. I wanted to just clear like everything else that I had planned, because here she is, reading some of the things and being curious, like, how can I do that as a second grade teacher in math? Because we hear people say, oh, I can't teach equity, I do math, and it's like, well, no, it's everywhere. And how do we do that? So I'm going to go back to my project-based learning and math book, and I'm going to go read up on culturally responsive project-based math. And then I would say, find like your anchor text, the things that can guide you, or small things you can do every day. Like I always have this book within arm's reach, because I would read one of these at morning meeting for fifth graders. And then sometimes we would talk about it, and sometimes we would just let it land. And I just read it in my Education in the 21st Century class, because I wanted to show them ways that equity can just be embedded in your day. And so what are your anchors? Like, what are the things that you can just do like with regular practice that are going to, make you feel like you're doing something and you're making a very big difference in the world, but then also like can be simple and doable regularly.
Awesome. I have just a couple. I want to start with this idea of cartwheels. My daughter is 8 years old and she plays on a soccer team. And when I go to practice, kids are like doing cartwheels and like jumping on the ball and falling and running all over. It's total chaos. And they love it. And I'm sitting there saying to myself, here are kids being kids. And now we're going to take them into school and we're going to ask them to sit still for 45 minutes at a time. And like, what are we doing? You know what I mean? No wonder there's a behavior issue. And so I think a lot about project-based learning. And I want to start looking at my week and saying, how many of days of the week am I having kids up and doing stuff versus actually sitting down and, whatever, doing a reflection or learning about the 3 spheres of sustainability. And I think when kids are moving, kids are happier. And when you provide structure for that through project-based learning or community walks or phonology, whatever it might be, I think that you're kind of on the road to success. Adding that factor of kids being kids into it, I think is awesome. The second thing I think is really important is community. Having kids interact with the community so that they realize that education is not just about the confines of the classroom. And the more connections you can get with the community, I think especially where I teach in Montpelier, for young teachers reaching out and having folks come in and talk to the class or just kind of give examples, or this is what I do and this is what I found is helpful. I think that it really helps expand the universe of what education means in kids' eyes. And I always think about it this way. There might be one kid who sees an engineer come in the room and says, man, I want to do that. The other 20 kids, maybe not. But if that one kid, and if you can bring in enough kind of different experiences, you can provide a really rich, a rich experience for the kids. And then the other thing that I'm doing a lot right now is, well, not a lot, but I'm trying to give appreciation to some of the colleagues who I see who are just crushing it. And right now in my school, there's the 5th grade team. They are just absolutely crushing it. And I go up there and I talk to them and I'm like, what are you doing? Or how do you manage this? And, I go up there and I have the 5th graders and I walk them back up to the classroom. And, I just watch how they interact with those teachers. And I'm learning and trying to soak up every little bit of that. That's been really important, but also acknowledging their expertise. And, you guys are just absolutely doing a great job. How are you doing this? And just asking questions, I think, is really important for me. And then the last thing I want to talk about, just maybe a little bit, it's serious, but it's Katie Farber in our last webinar talked about this culture of silence. And the other day I showed a 4-minute Clint Smith TED Talk about silence and what you're doing when you don't talk about the issues that kids care about and are thinking about. We mentioned that issue that's happening in Randolph about, transgender issues and how that's coming in and impacting kids. And I just feel like you need to be talking about this stuff in a super positive way, building those relationships and creating an experience that kids want to be a part of. And that's really hard. It's easy to say and it's super hard to do, but it takes a lot of thought and a lot of time. And then I think a lot of discussions with colleagues such as yourselves who are really bringing it to the table. I appreciate everything that you're doing. I hope that you have a fantastic month, rest of October and beginning of November. Our next webinar is on November 17th. And Vasante Maet, I want to thank you so much for contributing to our conversation tonight. Good luck with that program. We hope to see you again. And to everybody else, get outside, enjoy the time with the trees, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye now. Thank you, everybody, so much.
Bye. Thank you.
I think.